Hello, good evening. As I say, my name is Ron, and I'm one of the volunteers currently working on the Glamorganshire Canal in Pontypridd. Tonight, I'll be taking you on a two-part journey about the Glamorganshire Canal. Part one starts from the establishment of the canal in the 1790s. It's linked with Pontypridd and some other key dates leading up to its eventual demise. Part two catalogues the current efforts by our local volunteer group to restore one of the small remaining sections of the Glamorganshire Canal in Pontypridd as a historical monument to Pontypridd's industrial past. As I said, before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of the following persons for much of the historical and anecdotal information I will be quoting this evening. They are Stephen Rowson and Ian L. Wright, authors of the Glamorganshire and Aberdare Canal books, volumes 1 and 2, and Mr. Joseph Bowie, he's author of the British Canals, A Standard History, and Joseph has provided me with some of the more unusual facts, I think, about the Glamorganshire Canal. Right, so where did it all begin? Well, by the 1790s, it was established that substantial mineral deposits were to be found within the Taff Valley, especially around Wrth, where everything needed to produce cast iron, wrought iron, and latterly steel could be obtained. The change from coal to charcoal in the smelting process at Cyfarthfa and Penydaran in Wrth in around 1787 ensured a massive increase in iron production. And although iron ore, coal, and limestone could be obtained locally, the finished product could not be delivered economically to the place of export, which was Cardiff Docks. Those rail and road links, as we know them today, did not exist. Transport of material was via the use of mule trains to Cardiff and Swansea, but this was expensive, and with the imposition of the Turnpike Act in 1771, even though these roads were generally in better condition, a wagon was limited to carrying a maximum of 2 tons to the Old Quay in Cardiff. This mode of transport made it far too expensive for the ironmasters. Access to a dedicated canal would provide far more efficient means of transporting both heavy materials used in the production of iron and the finished goods themselves. Led by Richard Crauchete, men associated with the 4 ironworks at Merthyr, in association with prominent businessmen from Brecon and Cardiff, including the proprietors of Wilkins Bank, joined together, and in 1790, they secured an Act of Parliament to build the Glamorganshire Canal from Merthyr into Cardiff. This was the first substantial canal of any kind, and this was the first in Wales, really. The canal itself rose 542 feet from Cardiff to Merthyr by means of 52 locks, and is one of the highest summit levels in Britain. The highest was on the Huddersfield Canal at 648 feet, the second highest on the Rochdale at 600 feet. However, the 542 feet is all accomplished by one canal, and this made it the highest rising canal in the UK. Linked to the Glamorganshire Canal at Dunia, Rhyfel and Abercynon were 2 branch canals. In 1809, the so-called Doctor's Canal was commissioned by Dr. Richard Griffiths to connect his tramroad serving his coal pits to the Glamorgan Canal. Approximately 1 mile long, this ran from its head in Treforest to just below Loch 34 on the Glamorganshire Canal at Dunia. The second opened in 1812 and was built by the Aberdare Canal Company and ran for 6 3/4 miles from Aberdare to Abercynon for the transportation of iron and latterly steam coal. Moving on to my next slide, all technical. Here, this is Abercynon, and the arrow is actually pointing to the Glamorgan Canal Company's offices at Navigation House. At the first committee meeting of the Glamorganshire Canal Company, they agreed to engage Thomas Dadford Senior, Thomas Dadford Junior, and Thomas Sheesby as joint contractors to make the Glamorganshire Canal. Thomas Dadford Senior, originally from Staffordshire, started out as an assistant to James Brindley and worked on the Staffordshire, Worcestershire and Birmingham canals in that capacity. Latterly, he worked on many canal projects in Wales, including the Monmouthshire and Brecon Canal, Neath and Aberdare canals. The cost for the Glamorganshire Canal at the time was £42,288. Although this was to be exclusive of any land purchase, and a bond of £10,000 was taken from them for actually finishing the work. The canal brief, what were they asked to do? Well, the brief given to the contractors was the canal was to be 30 feet wide at the surface and 4 foot deep. Bridges were to span 18 foot with a hailing or toll path beneath them. Although some of the tail bridges, such as the one in Pontypridd, had the path go around. Locks were to be 60 foot in length from gate to gate and 9 foot 6 inches wide. Following a survey, the route from Merthyr was to travel down the west side of the valley, high above the River Taff for 9 miles, to Abercynon, where it would change to the east side of the valley for the remaining 15 miles into Cardiff. So you can see this actual slide is Rydfelen, and you can see the lock there. Might not be able to see the bridge, but that was a typical stretch of the canal. The workforce, I'll mention this breach later. I think this is the one in Nantgarw, but in terms of the workforce, they were almost certainly made up of journeymen. These were skilled, qualified workmen made up masons, quarrymen, carpenters, sawyers, lime burners, and smiths. Some of whom were employed as foremen or gangmasters. Then they took on the responsibility for the management and payment of the workforce. In terms of wages, the price paid to gangmasters for digging was about threepence old money, a cubic yard, although this could rise to threepence halfpenny in lock pits, 5p or 7p in deep cuttings, and 9p for blasting rock. Because canals are not a natural watercourse, so clay and straw were used to maintain the water integrity of the canal. This process was known as puddling. For clay puddling the bed of the canal, men were paid 6p a square yard, but there were additional allowances for felling trees, moving soil beyond a measured distance, and also extra payments went to men for unpleasant jobs, such as working in water, where sometimes the reward was allowances of gin or beer. As for the stone workers, leaders of the groups of masons could get 5p a square foot for coining the stone, and 21 shillings for 100 square feet of general masonry. The Glamorganshire Canal in Pontypridd. For those of you who might recognise it, this is the Corn Stores Hill in Pontypridd, and the arrow there that points to well, the corn stores actually on the hill there. Right, except for Cardiff, the busiest section of the canal was at Trallon in Pontypridd. Its locks and wharfs, they received and sent goods from all over the place. Travelling down the valley, arriving in Pontypridd, the first of these locks is Loch Odin, a double, which was Loch 28 and 29. Where the canal also connected with Hopkin Morgan's private short bakery, and they had a small wharf there as well. Being a major customer in Pontypridd area, millers in Cardiff, such as Spillers, transported flour loaded in 160-pound sacks by barge up the canal to the bakery, which had outlets all the way throughout South Wales. As I said, highlighted by the arrow is the Corn Stores, and this was established in 1850 by William Lewis, and he traded there for nearly a century. Supplies were winched up from the boats, and the corn was actually ground on site by steam-powered engines. The Glamorgan Canal Company also had its own warehouse not far from there at Tratlon, along with an extensive canal site community. Later, the advent of steam coal led to the growth of run the coal exports all around the world. And in around 1840, this brought a lot more work to the area. This is one of the more prominent businesses in Tratlon, and right known as the Davis Canal Wharf, who we see here at his canal stores. He and his son actually owned their own boats, and they carried cargoes daily between Pontypridd and Cardiff. I'm not sure whether many of you who know Pontypridd will remember that, at the bottom of the hill there. Right, another key sort of landmark in Pontypridd was at the Queen's, and where we got the Queen's here, you can actually see the Queen's Hotel. In front of that, Lock 30. And I've pointed out a little bit further down the Llanover Arms. You see it down there. Even though the Queen's Hotel was popular for people observing the business around the canal, it was said that the boatmen did not actually use the Queen's, and they preferred to go to the Llanover Arms, the popular haunt. Many people in Pontypridd do today, actually. Right. This is where we are, and the photograph there is of Brown Lennox Chainworks. There we go. This is the site that we were actually working on at the moment, and the site of Brown Lennox Chainworks. Chains and anchor works, sorry, where barges will unload coal supplies and other raw materials to the work. The upper gates, which I put with a little red circle there, that's where the water was carried off and entered the top basin there in yellow. And that was channeled into a narrowing volume for the turbines within the factory. These in turn would drive the shafts coupled to the chain making machines before passing under the works to the lower basin. That's the lower basin there. So it would pass from the yellow all the way through the factory, and then it would eventually come out there at the lower basin. Wrought iron chain, cable and anchors forged by the skilled blacksmiths employed by Brown Lennox were lowered through the floor of the test house, and after examination of each link into a waiting canal boat for the trip to Cardiff. In 1824, nearly 1,000 tons of iron products were carried on the canal, and by 1835, the annual shipments had increased to 2,500 tons and 4,000 tons by 1839. Other cargo taken on by barges at Ynys Locks included beer, ale, and stout from Ynys Brewery and bottling stores, and that was located at the bunch of great pub. If you're looking at the picture there, it's just to the right of the red square, the pub. Ynys Locks themselves were one of several staircase piers, and this was the lowest on the canal, except for the triple lock, Nantgarw. This kind of lock was, however, far more characteristic of earlier waterways. And the first canal in Britain, the Sankey, included one staircase pier opened in 1757. Although they tended to use far more water and caused holdups in traffic, so they became less popular. At this point, I'd like to mention that there are many more businesses linked to the canal further down the valley. Nantgarw China Works being one of the more notable ones. However, it would be impossible to feature any more of them in such a small period of time that we've got this evening. So for the next part of the presentation now, I'm going to go through some of the key events relating to the Glamorganshire Canal. Some of them will be pretty straightforward in terms of where we've been before. Of course, 1790, the work starts at Georgetown in Merthyr. So that's where we kick off the start of the canal. By June 1792, the canal reaches Pontypridd, or as it was known then, Newbridge. 1793, the canal reaches Treforest, and in the June of that same year, then it got as far as Taff's Well. In February 1794, the canal opened, and it required repairs later that year. So I think that was a sign of things to come. And then further extension then, 4 years later, was the extension to the sea lock near Cardiff. So that was opened up in June 1798. I think, as I mentioned earlier, in 1809, the Dr. Richard Griffiths Canal is built from Treforest down to Dunia. And in May 1812, the Aberdare Canal is opened. In 1816, Brown Lennox opened their chain and anchor works. Now, Brown Lennox originally started off up in Millwall in London, and they saw the opportunity of moving down to the site in Pontypridd, obviously because of the canal and the ease in which you could get the raw materials from the ironworks up in Merthyr into its canal, and then on down to Cardiff. So good reason for doing it that way. Right. 1898, the canal was closed north of Abercynon. Now, it's worth noting that the canal, the closure on the canal was a formal legal process that often proved very controversial and costly for canal owners. On the 6th of December 1698, the canal closed north of Abercynon due to a mining subsidence and the danger of further breaches. And then north of Pontypridd after an unprepared breach in Kilfynydd in 1915. But there seemed to be little or no protest about the closure either, perhaps because much of the traffic carried by the canal was by the Glamorgan Canal Company itself. Elsewhere, there were protests over arbitrary closures because the right of navigation remained, and any trader could insist upon repairs to the canal and or compensation. Except for the sea lock found in Cardiff, this doesn't seem to have happened on the Glamorganshire Canal. Right, in 1900, the Aberdare Canal closed. An interesting fact about this is that where the Aberdare Canal linked into the Glamorganshire Canal at Abercynon, round about Lock 17, the Abercynon flight, consisting of 16 locks, mostly staircase pairs, one of the with large falls, was one of the steepest flights of locks in Britain. Right, 1908, we saw a major breach at Dunia, and in 1915, as mentioned earlier again, following a major breach at the canal at Kilfynydd, a decision was made not to repair that. The loss of this section canal now meant that trade was restricted to just up to Pontypridd from Cardiff. 1923, the Doctors Canal closed. And in 1942, there was a major breach again at Nantgarw. That was in May of 1942. And whilst the engineers were called in to look at the problem, no repairs were subsequently undertaken, thus bringing to the end of the canal's working life, really, as a waterway. After 1942, much of the waterway was allowed to decay with only small stretches remaining intact. Forest Farm, a mile length of canal at Whitchurch in Cardiff, was retained and opened as a nature reserve in 1967, while in Pontypridd, locks 31 and 32 were converted for use as cooling reservoirs by Brown Lennox. In undertaking this conversion, many of the original lock structures were destroyed and severely damaged. Lock chambers were extensively rendered, and 2 reinforced concrete dams were created at the original site of the lock gates to isolate each chamber. The upstream of the locks was filled in, whilst the remainder was left to become rapidly overgrown. While it would often be suggested that the sites of British canals could be used in road construction, this had rarely been carried out outside of South Wales. Part of the Swansea and the Crumlin branch above Abercarn have been converted to roads, but much of the line of the Glamorganshire Canal is now occupied by the A470. The Aberdare Canal, on the other hand, has almost all entirely been used for road from the 1920s. 1943, Cardiff Corporation acquired the canal. Yeah, Cardiff Corporation acquired the canal up to Abercarn, which was a rare occurrence as an example of a local authority purchase of a nominally working canal. And it was partly out of Cardiff Corporation area anyway. It was not able to remove remaining trade from the canal until 1951, although the breach at Nangarrow in 1942, the canal had been unnavigable outside Cardiff. Local authorities did not acquire the whole working waterways. The Gloucestershire County Council acquired the Thames and Severn Canal, all of which was in Gloucester, in order to restore it. But this would be closed in 1927 and 1933. 1957, the canal basin and locks and part of the canal was purchased by Brown Lennox, and they converted it then for industrial use. In 1991, Annisgharad locks were sold to Pontypridd Town Council. And in 2001, the locks themselves and the basin were awarded Grade 2 listed status by Cadw. That concludes this part of the presentation. I hope what I've been able to present to you has given you a brief insight into the history of the Glamorganshire Canal, the individuals involved, and some of the many industries that operated along its length from Merthyr to Cardiff. There's so much information and details available that I can give in such a limited time. But if you want to learn more about the canal, I can certainly recommend the 2 volumes that I mentioned earlier, and Joseph Bowie's information on the canals in Britain as well. Right, for the second part, I'd like to talk to you now, and I'm going to share with you some of the work that we've been doing on the canal locks themselves over the past 11 years. Following the closure of Brown Lennox in 2000, the prospect of redevelopment of the site offered hope that the canal might be restored. And in 2010, our current group was formed by Mr. Bill Hockey, who's unfortunately no longer with us. The group was supported by the Inland Waterways Association, which in 2011 awarded the group a feasibility study grant. And volunteers then we carried out surveys to see if we can get the canal's locks at least back to some sort of a semblance of how they were when they were in their heyday. A significant partnership has been sort of formed with Ron Keats and Taff County Borough Council and with Pontypridd Town Council, who obviously helped us with the work on the site. Right, this is basically the state of the locks when before the work started. All this had been subsumed by nature, and the stonework underneath that wasn't to be seen. So the first priority really was to get in there, get all this cut back, have a look to see what the size of the task was, and then get in and have a go at it. This is after the clearance of most of the undergrowth and so on. And as you can see clearly, the locks are pretty much as they would have been when they were built. If you look at the right hand picture there, what we've done, we've had to remove a lot of the render, and I think you can see just in the center of the lock there, that's one of the concrete dams that Glamorganshire actually installed when they converted them. This is the work of the plants getting and the tree root systems getting under the stones. This is actually in the area of the lock gates, and you can see in the center there where the ground paddle would have actually gone down to open the gate to let the water into the lock below. I think you can just make out there as well the top of the concrete dam. And this is the stonework after we'd been in there and removed all of the root work out of there. As you can appreciate, heavy work, and it was all done by hand. We've got no machinery there at all. It's a labour of love, and I think we've used the techniques used by the Egyptians when they were building the pits on that one, so that came in handy. This is the top of Lock 31, and where you see the red brickwork there and the pits underneath, they were right on the lock gates. Now, when they converted the lock, they created a sluice there, and I think you can see in the center the pipe disappearing off up into beyond. That would have been in the actual channel itself, and there you can see really the extent of how they blocked up the canal channel and converted it to narrow the water through there. And basically the amount of pipe work that we found within that, it was like a network of pipes. They were going everywhere. So that one of the first things that we had to do was really get in there and start to remove this. So this is us in the process of doing that. Even though it looks small, it was a devil to get out of there. Take ages. It was very, very compact. It'd been there for years and years and years, and it was like steel. You can see in this photograph, and I think an arrow is going to come up now. Right, now that there is part of the original canal structure. It was part of what formed what they call a stop dam. Now, a stop dam was used when they had to repair a lock gate. So it was a means of stopping the flow of water behind that, so that they could get in and do any repair work necessary on the gate itself. So that really was still in situ when we decided to take all the brickwork away. And this is what we ended up with. The wood there would have been exactly the same as a stop dam. So you can see in effect really what the dam would have done. Cleared it out, and the settling pits are still there. What they did with those settling pits is they've actually gone through the original canal floor. They've dug down deeper than the original floor surface itself, so they damaged that, and we can't actually repair that at the moment. So we've just left it for the time being, see what we can do there. This is a look up Block 31, and again, as I mentioned before, with the render that was put onto the lock, the stonework was completely covered up, sorry, and we've had to uncover all that, take it all off, and the actual craftsmanship and the stonework in these locks is unbelievable. You have to see it close up to really appreciate the skill of those people that are obviously working with hand tools. Again, looking inside there, that's inside the lock. Gives you an idea, really. You can still see some of the round at the bottom. Now, the bottom of the lock itself, that has been covered in concrete, but we've left that in there. It doesn't make any sense to sort of pull that up at the moment. Trying to expose that could damage the floor of the lock. So at the minute, we've just left it. Right, here is what's called a ground paddle, or what's left of a ground paddle. This would have been just at the top of lock 31. Basically, that would have been like a sash window device, really, where you've got your frame around. You'd have had a gate over that opening there, made of wood, braced with metal, and above it, you'd have had like a rack and pinion winding gear, really. So you'd have put your handle on it, and away you go, raise that up, and that would have let the water down in through there and out through there, because that's the outlet in lock 31. Again, all of that was bricked up by Brown Lennox, because obviously they wanted to use it as a water tank as such. So the integrity, really, of the structure was maintained by the concrete. Right, this is a different story. Now, this is lock 32, and as you can see from that picture, it is pretty devastating in terms of the amount of damage that was done. As you look at the photograph there, the right-hand side of the lock was where Brown Lennox actually built a generator plant, and that was purely to create direct current electricity for the machinery in the plant. That information we got from a passerby who had actually worked in Brown Lennox, and told us that that was the reason for the conversion, for cooling some of the plant inside the works, and for the generation of the electricity as well. There you can see the little tail bridge, what's left there, and under that tail bridge would have been the smaller second dam, forming then the second tank, as it were. Now, again, on that one, you can see some of the pipework and the damage to the stone. And on this one, this is what we had to deal with in terms of silt. If you were standing in that, it would be 5 foot. So that was 5 foot deep, and as I mentioned earlier, these locks are 60 foot long. So there was a lot of material in there that had to be moved, so we could actually get to the original lock floor and clear out the lock. Look, there's yours truly, but they're working on some of the copings on the side. When I say that we've been going since 2010, for about 6 years, there were just 3 of us working on it. So most of the work that you see there was done by 3 people. The stonework, again, much of it was displaced by root work and by the clearance of the undergrowth there. And that's the result of our handiwork, putting some of the bigger stones back. A few of those ended up in the bottom of the lock, and again, they had to be lifted out manually before we could reset them. This is looking up lock 32 from the tail bridge end, and if you can look up on top of the lock, you will see that there's no staircase on the left-hand side. That was completely demolished. Nothing left there at all, and you can just about make out on the other side the copings starting to fall in. Right, this is the lock empty, and as I said, there are some of the larger of the stones that have ended up at the bottom of the lock. And if you can just look at the second picture, just to the left of those, where those stones are, can you see what looks like a pipe? Well, that's what it is, because that was a stone pipe that Brown Lennox put through the wall of the lock, and that formed part of their system of pipework. that they actually used then when they were operating the canal as or the canal locks as water tanks. Again, this is the pipework that they installed. They obviously went in through the walls of the original stonework there, put the pipes in, and that was then just covered back by red brick. So they just bricked it up, and that's the result of us, well, taking the pipework out and then restoring that. That's all been pointed now. We use hydraulic lime for the pointing work on it, as it would have been done in days of the 1790s. In fact, we went up to Timo works up in Brecon. They do a lot of traditional work up there. In fact, they worked on the Lido in Pontypridd, and we had the mortar analysed, and they gave us a recipe then for us to make up the mortar as it would have been used originally for the work. This is in Lock 32, and that's part of the original flooring within the lock system that we uncovered. We took up the concrete from that because obviously we could see part of where the shovel is there. Just to the left of that, that's where the wooden sill would have been for the lock gates. And if it looks as if it's going into an arrow, well, it did, because there were two gates there, and they would have formed into a V shape when they were closed. And in the corner there, we uncovered that's the pivot point for the bottom of the lock gate. So the gate would have actually come down that wall. The bottom of the gate would have rested on that, and then it would have balanced at the top then with a hoop that would have been secured, and basically the pivot, if you like, or the counter arm would have just rotated that the whole gate on that point there. As I mentioned earlier, the one staircase that was left, well, partially left for us, was the east staircase, and a lot of the bigger coping stones were very dangerously loose, and they were hanging off. They were just about to fall in. So what we had to do basically was get in there, take them all away. We reinstated a lot of the stonework underneath to secure it, and then we started to replace them and put them back in. On this side, we were lucky that we had the majority of the copings was still on site, but as you see with the other one, we didn't have anything at all on that one. Again, that's another aspect of it. You can see that it was pretty loose on that side, and that's after we finished putting it back in on there. Again, you know, we've had to lift all of this in by hand, pretty much as whether they would have done that in the original days, I don't know, but there we go, and that's it finished. I mean, that's the east staircase. That's all done, all pointed up, all looking nice, but it didn't look like that when we started. Right, in between the locks, a lot of the boatmen really went across bridges like this. Now, in Pontypridd, we didn't have any bridges left. They were long gone. But the picture you see on the left there, that's from Taft's Well, and it was a similar design to the one that we had in Pontypridd. And what we had to do, because we were lucky enough, we had the footprint of the timbers left in the mortar, we basically reverse engineered the bridges. So we started off with a picture of an old bridge, what it would look like, a footprint of the timbers where we could get in there and replace them. And then we started to put it together piece by piece till we ended up with a bridge. And that's our efforts there. That's the new bridge in. A lot of this metalwork here, as I mentioned earlier, there were smiths on site. So all the ironwork that was required for the gates or for reinforcing the bridges, that would have all been made on site. But we had to obviously get that made and put in. That's the other staircase, believe it or not, or at least that's where it should be. Again, what you can see there are the remnants of the works that Brown Lennox put in. And once we had taken a lot of that away, what we had to do was to start then to reform what would have been the west staircase. So we built basically a bunker, and that would serve as a retaining structure for the rebuilding. So we started off with that. Again, you can see us out at work there, starting taking it away, starting to rebuild from the bottom up. The pipe, you may be wondering what the pipe is for. Well, we've put that in there as a conduit because the plan is to get water to go back up into the top lock and use the locks themselves as like a model, but a full-scale model of how the system would have worked. So if we needed to pump water back up, then we're not going to take the stairs back down again. So we can pump it back through those pipes. So we put that in just as a precursor, really, for doing that. And then you can see with the other photographs there, the progress then that we've been making on reconstructing from scratch the west staircase. That's the east staircase and the west staircase seen as a group. And as you can see on that side there, we had to take them down. That side was missing, so we've had to rebuild that. And of course, over there was absolutely nothing. And that's how it looks now. So after 4 years, we've managed to rebuild that one, totally rebuild that one from scratch. And we're in the process now at the moment of near the small tail bridge of reconstructing the stonework there so we can put the second bridge in there. So that's work that we were doing this very morning. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. I mean, it's a bit of a quick race through, but as a historical monument for the industrial past of Pontypridd, it would have been a shame really to let it go to rack and ruin. So when we're finished, and I don't think it'll be finished anytime too soon, but when we are finished, hopefully it will be a legacy for Pontypridd, really. Thank you.